Okay, so you want to buy a McDonald's, a real one, with your name on the franchise. Here is what that costs. The buy-in starts at about $1.5 million. It can run past 2.5, and McDonald's will not even take your call unless you have $750,000 sitting in cash that you did not borrow. So let us say you have it. You pay. You finally own a McDonald's. And here is the part nobody puts in the brochure. You do not really own a restaurant. You own a lease from the most successful landlord in the history of the planet. Because the company you just paid is barely in the hamburger business. It is one of the largest real estate empires on Earth, sitting on tens of billions of dollars of land, and the rent it is about to charge you is where the money has always been. A man at this company said that out loud decades ago in a room full of investors, and he was not being clever. We will get there. You are not buying a restaurant. You are buying a 30-year lease from a real estate company that happens to sell hamburgers. By the end of this video, you will know how a burger stand quietly became a landlord, why the rent matters far more than the Big Mac ever did, and the crack running underneath the whole golden arrangement. Because every empire built on rent depends on the same fragile thing. Start with the burgers, because you should see how thin that business really is before you see what is stacked on top of it. Selling food is a grind. McDonald's still runs about 5% of its restaurants itself. And last year, those company-owned stores rang up close to $10 billion in sales. That sounds enormous. But out of every single one of those dollars comes the beef, the bun, the oil, the paper, the electricity, and the wages of a dozen people moving at a dead sprint through the lunch rush. What is left at the very bottom is thin, and the franchisees, the people whose name is actually on the store, the ones who fry the food and mop the floor, they keep only cents on each dollar after everyone else is paid. Remember that, because the person standing at the fryer makes the least of anyone in this entire story. They will work harder. They will assume next quarter is the one that finally fixes it. It is not. So if the food barely pays, how did McDonald's become one of the most valuable companies on the planet? To find the answer, you have to walk past the kitchen, past the franchisee counting his thin margin, into a part of the company that has no grills in it at all. Go back to 1956. A quiet accountant named Harry Sonneborn looked at this little hamburger chain and saw something nobody else had seen. And he said it to a room of investors plainly. "We are not in the food business," he told them. "We are in the real estate business. The only reason we sell hamburgers," he said, "is that they are the best way to get our tenants to pay us rent." Ray Kroc, the man who built the empire, agreed without flinching. "I am not in the hamburger business," Kroc said. "My business is real estate." Here is exactly what they meant. When you open a McDonald's, the company does not just hand you a logo and a recipe and wish you luck. McDonald's finds the corner. McDonald's buys the land or signs the long lease on it, and it owns the building that goes up. And then McDonald's rents that building to you. You are not its partner. You are its tenant. And the rent is not small. On top of the 4% royalty you pay for the right to use the name, on top of the 4% you pour into advertising, you hand your landlord a rent that averages around 10.7% of everything you sell. Stack it up. Close to 1/5 of every dollar that crosses your counter is gone to the corporation before you have paid a single cook, and the biggest piece of that, by far, is rent. You are not really a franchise owner. You are a tenant with a logo. Now take that rent and multiply it across more than 40,000 restaurants. Last year, the rent came to about $10 billion. The royalties, the brand fees everyone always talks about, came to $5.6 billion. Read that again. The rent is nearly double the royalties. McDonald's makes far more money as your landlord than it does as your franchisor. Out of $25 billion in total revenue, the rent check is the single largest line on the page, and it is the cleanest money in the building. The franchisee absorbs the broken ice cream machine, the no-show employee, the angry midnight drive-thru, the staffing, the spills, the complaints. McDonald's just owns the dirt. And the rent arrives whether you sell one burger that day or 1,000. And the dirt is the real treasure. McDonald's carries its land and buildings on the books at more than $28 billion, and at today's prices that property is worth closer to $40 billion, which makes this hamburger company one of the largest private landlords on the face of the earth. It owns the ground under most of its restaurants, so look at it clearly. The Golden Arches are not a fast food chain that happens to own some property. They are a real estate portfolio with a drive-thru bolted onto the front. The burger is just the tenant. The land is the business. So look at what you would actually be buying. A brutal, low-margin food operation that you run, that wears you down at 6 in the morning and 11 at night, that earns you cents on the dollar, wrapped around a rent machine that you pay into, that compounds quietly for the company every single month, forever. The restaurant is the storefront. The lease is the asset, and the moment you see that clearly, you can also see exactly where this whole beautiful thing could crack. But here is the part that is not written into any contract McDonald's has ever signed. This entire empire of rent only works for as long as the people paying it can survive. And McDonald's keeps testing that line. In 2024, the company decided to raise the royalty on new restaurants from 4% up to 5%. The first increase in almost 30 years, and the franchisees revolted openly because they are already handing over close to 1/5 of their sales before they have paid for a single hour of labor. Push the rent and the fees high enough, and the tenant stops being able to make the burgers at all. That is the real risk hiding under the arches. Not a slow month of Big Mac sales. A landlord squeezing the tenant a little harder every year until one day the tenant simply cannot breathe. And this is not a hypothetical. It has already happened to people you can name. Meet Herb Washington, a World Series champion who built one of the largest black-owned franchise empires in the entire McDonald's system. 27 restaurants at his peak. He says the company steered him into the locations nobody else wanted, then graded his stores with brutal inspections until he was pushed to sell them off, one after another, down toward nothing. McDonald's denied any wrongdoing, but in 2022, the company paid him $33.5 million to settle, and Herb walked away from the arches for good. 27 restaurants, down to 0, because Herb never owned the land underneath them. McDonald's did. He was only ever the tenant, and the landlord is the one who decides who stays. The whole machine runs on one fragile thing, the operator on the ground, staying alive. So how does the smart money play a company like this? Watch each player at the table. The franchisee takes the hardest job in the building and the thinnest slice of the reward. The corporation takes the rent, the royalty, and the appreciating land, and it takes all three whether the lunch rush is packed or empty. And the investors, the ones who actually understand what they are holding, stopped pricing McDonald's like a restaurant a very long time ago. They value it like what it truly is, a real estate and royalty machine wearing the most beloved logo on earth, far closer to a giant landlord than to a diner. They were never really buying the Big Mac. They were buying the ground it sits on. So here is the question. Knowing the food barely pays, knowing the rent is the real engine, and knowing the whole arrangement rests on a tenant who has to keep surviving, would you still want to own the McDonald's? Or are you starting to suspect you would rather own the dirt underneath it? Most people say the restaurant, because the restaurant is the part you can see. The smart money bought the land a long time ago. Tell me in the comments which one you actually are. I genuinely want to know.